acceptable to God, and make that our spiritual worship. And the next verse he says, to not conform to the values of this age, but to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. And that just sounds amazing, but he doesn't tell us how to do it. And I think Ignatius kind of picks up that directive from Paul and gives us a methodology about how to do it, how to transform and renew our mind so that we may judge what is pleasing and perfect to God. And so Ignatian spirituality, to me, is this ongoing process of, it's entering a process of ongoing conversion, where we continue to be transformed and renewed. Identity continues to shift. It's not static. We may be able to make some statements about who we think we are at this particular moment in time, but the person that we think we are doesn't capture the fullness of the reality of who we are that continues to move through time, that changes with the change in relationships, that changes with the changes in our body and our life. So it's inviting us into this process of continual transformation that, as those diagrams kind of illustrated, kind of pull us into a deeper center of ourselves. And God is at that center, at the heart. One of my favorite definitions of yoga is a yoga, to yoke, to carry our individual consciousness and connect with the source of consciousness. And I think Ignatian yoga is a process like that. We're invited into this process to connect our mind with the mind of God, to connect our heart with the heart of God. And I think Greg Boyle describes it as the work to make our heart the shape of God's heart. And that really resonates with me. This process is ever increasing awareness of self and our identity in God through practices like the examen, discernment of the spirits, imaginative prayer, all of these things. And it's really culminated in Ignatius's great work in the exercises, which is, Bobby's done it as a 30-day silent retreat, and the original design is to retreat from life for 30 days and to spend time in prayer, meeting with the spiritual director daily, and work through these 4 themes represented by each week of the month that you're gone. And the process just is brilliant. And Ignatius, working in the 16th century, was so ahead of his time in terms of how psychologically sound the whole process is to draw us into this transformation. I continue to be amazed at it. But he deliberately chooses this term exercises. I think there's this deliberate connection for us to kind of, it's easy, I say it all the time in class that sports is the great metaphor for so many things, because what is true in our physicality is also true at deeper levels of ourselves. So the kinds of things that we discover about how to integrate movement to become more effective, to become more fluid, are also the same kind of processes that take place of integration of the mind and the spirit. With exercise, we lay down these neural pathways, and what we start out doing very intentionally and consciously becomes more reflexive, we become more relaxed, we become more proficient in doing it. So he lays out these practices in the exercises of repetition of prayer, of introducing imaginative prayer, and you start to become what may start out as very awkward and difficult. You kind of settle in over time, and it becomes very natural. The process of doing the examine and reflecting over your day may be difficult at first, but you kind of settle into that process, and you see these movements. And he says over time you're going to recognize places in your day where you were unsettled, or places where you felt at peace. Certain people that you're with are unsettling, and others bring you calm and peace, and you feel love. And over time, you can pay attention to the patterns that develop. And this is discerning, Once you become aware of it, then you can start making conscious decisions to move towards certain relationships and away from others, to engage in certain kinds of conversations, activities that are nurturing, life-giving, where you encounter love. And so we find God, tucked in the corners of our day, always there with us, but most of the time we're so often not aware of it, I guess. Through the practices, these experiences become more immersive. The meditations become more transformational. And over time, the perceived distinction between what is prayer, what is our prayer life, and what is our secular life kind of blends together more and more. It's not such a clear distinction. And what we come to realize, interestingly enough, Ignatius actually tells us right in the very beginning. Ignatian spirituality is teleological in the sense that he tells us at the beginning where we will arrive. And at the very end of the first principle and foundation, which is the first thing that you read in the exercises, he tells us that basically you will arrive at this place of detachment. You will be less focused on your small sense of self and much more aware of those concentric circles going out, a sense of self that is connected to others in greater and greater degrees. And he says it this way: thus, as far as we are concerned, we should not want health more than illness, wealth more than poverty, fame more than disgrace, a long life more than a short one, and so on. He's speaking to that point of God pours himself out in creation, pours himself out into us, and we learn to dance with God and reciprocate that outpouring, where we pour out ourselves back to him. The diminishment of the ego, which is a big focus in yoga. And it reminds me again of St. Paul, where he says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The sense of his own individual self, to let go of it, to be aware of being filled with Christ's love. So, the journey inward becomes the journey outward as well. And there's so much emphasis in the society, among the Jesuits and our Jesuit school, about social justice, community and communal service. And the more that we discover our identity rooted in God, the more aware we become that God is rooted in everyone else as well. And so the love for God isn't just self-contained here, but it becomes something that we see out in the world. And when Ignatius commanded the Jesuits to go and set the world on fire, he wasn't saying you go and change it. He was saying go and love it. The love that you have for God is what we will find out there in the world. So setting the world on fire is a transformational, and yet Bobby spoke to that earlier. It's about transforming the world out of love, not whatever we might think it should be. If you make me the king of the world would be just as dysfunctional as it is right now, just according to my personality. It's about transforming it through God's love, and we just become the vehicles for that. So I want to close by reading the suscipe, which is a word in Latin that means to receive. God pours himself out, and we learn to let go of ourselves and pour ourselves back to God. And we ask in the suscipe that God receives us. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all I have and call my own. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen.